Extra time.
Hello and welcome back to the Extra Time podcast. It's me, your host, Patrick van Straaten, and this week I'm joined by Henry Hill. Hello, Henry. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. Yeah, really, I feel like this weekend was the weekend I actually really needed, considering kind of this lockdown's been such a kind of boring struggle, I think. I'm not saying mine's been particularly, I'm sure lots of people have suffered worse, but like just to have all the snow, and it was also a beautiful weekend. It's so nice when good things happen on a weekend like this. Do you know what I mean? Like beautiful day of sun and then a really snowy Sunday. The fact that all happened this weekend was a real plus. So I'm very happy about all of that.
I know what you mean. Like my wife and I literally just stood at like our bedroom window watching the snow for ages. And then actually like you sort of made my weekend, because normally on a Sunday I realise like, oh God, I need to like get into the Football Daily WhatsApp group, find somebody to do the podcast, come up with a good title. And then like you texted me saying, hey, I could do the podcast and also I have an idea for the podcast. And I was like, this is amazing.
Well,
this is the best Sunday ever.
I hope that's not what it is to, you know, bring it to life. I hope there's more going on. But yes, no, it's always good. It's always exciting to be on the podcast. So thank you.
Oh, well, this is one of the babies that I have to prepare for. The other is mostly like clearing a room to try and turn it into a nursery. So that's the other thing that I do in my weekends at the moment. But your idea for the podcast this week I thought was a really good one, because basically we decided to talk about some of the big transfers of the summer, see how they're going about halfway through the year, how people are settling, how we expect them to develop going forward. And my understanding is the thing that sent you down this particular path was the progression of João Felix at Atletico Madrid. Yeah,
I mean, obviously, big fee. I think it was £113 million, I think. Or something in the ballpark around there, which Atletico paid for him. First season really left a lot to be desired. Lots of question marks about whether or not he even fitted the Simeone system, all that kind of jazz. But then suddenly, roll on 12 months, and he is looking like a genuine, you know, star of world football. Scored and got an assist this weekend, I believe, in Atletico's win again. And it really does look like he's going to be on the end of he's going to have a La Liga winners medal come the end of the season, certainly if Luis Suarez keeps performing the way he does. And suddenly everyone's like, oh, João Felix, he always had it. He's brilliant, etc., etc. And then, so using that, it's interesting to then look at some of the signings who we now maybe are beginning to lay into already, because they're not fulfilling the criteria, which I suppose people assumed they would do. And that was inspired really by Havertz and Werner. And it's only become more relevant because obviously we're shooting this on a Monday, and we've just all heard the news as well that Frank Lampard has been sacked by Chelsea. I'm not surprised by anything anymore, certainly when it comes to that club. What are your initial thoughts on that, Pat?
I think it was probably coming. Like, I mean, I've been kind of a critic of Frank Lampard all along. On the other hand, I don't think that what he's done this season has been noticeably worse than what he did last season. Last season, I thought he got far too much credit for like bringing through these young players, given that I thought the young players were all very good. Like, I don't think that you get much credit. Like, if like Kylian Mbappe's in your club and he breaks through, I don't think you get much credit for developing him, because I think he's just a star player. And with guys like Tammy Abraham, you know, Reece James, I kind of felt like these were just guys who were ready to play at Premier League level. And I mean, I also thought that, you know, the Eden Hazard leaving thing was a bit overcooked, given that they also managed to bring in, you know, Christian Pulisic, who I think is possibly their best attacker. Like, he's an amazing player. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, the problem was this season, I think, the souring of the relationship, right?
Yeah.
And I did say a few weeks ago that a thing I had an issue with was the way that he came out after games and just like hung players out to dry. Like, I really think that that's like quite small time. Like, whenever I see a manager do that, I always think, oh, this is not the job for you, because like you just can't do that all the time. Like, once in a while, sure, you blow up and have a go at a player, but every week I felt like Frank Lampard was saying, I cannot fail. I can only be failed by my players. And I think that inevitably that was going to result in some sort of souring. But like you, I'm a bit surprised that Chelsea have done it, given that it pretty much brings an end to a really kind of like great relationship they've had with that guy over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I agree what you mean. I think this weekend, the video of him digging out a journalist in the press conference.
Oh God,
That's not professional kind of behaviour, is it? Certainly not of a manager of one of the biggest clubs in European football. It is a little bit amateur in that regard. But yeah, the gauntlet was thrown down when they spent that much money in the transfer window. It kind of had to. Didn't have much choice, and it did look like it was working. There was that spell where they went unbeaten for about 10 games, sort of cruised through a Champions League group. Which I thought Sevilla would cause them a lot more problems than they did, and but it is kind of a real shame to see it go off the rails as much as it's done. But I mean, it's going to be really interesting, I think, to see, because it's all well and good sacking Ancelotti after an amazing achievement that he's done, but Ancelotti doesn't have that ingrained kind of folklore within the club itself. Lampard is obviously really loved and adored by the fans, and I'm really interested to see the fallout of that kind of scenario, if you know what I mean. Because even Jose Mourinho, there was always that explosive element to it, but we're talking about a real darling of Chelsea Football Club. How are the fans going to react on this occasion? Because there's only so many times you could just sort of, the management level could surely just get rid of the coaches without maybe having to take a self-reflection of their own kind of work behind the scenes.
Yeah, though I think, look, the issue here obviously though is not that the Chelsea structure signed bad players, right? Like it's whether there was a role waiting for these guys coming in. Because I've got to say that, like, okay, I think there were 15 players signed last summer for over £35 million. 4 of them went to Chelsea. And I think that they were all basically good signings, and will be fine in the long term. I mean, like, can we start with Werner first?
Yeah, sure.
Because like Timo Werner, I think is I have zero worries about Timo Werner whatsoever.
No, I agree.
Like, I don't really understand it. He's been criticised for missing sitters this season. I think that basically fans don't realise that all good strikers miss sitters. Like, that is just like what happens when you're a good forward. But he's still got 13 goal involvements in 25 appearances across the league and Champions League. That seems pretty good to me. All his numbers are down from last season. All of them. But the numbers he's got at the moment are still very good. Like, very, very good. He's still at like 0.6 expected goals and assists a game. Shots are pretty decent. Key passes are pretty decent. Doing plenty of dribbling. Like, his defensive numbers are kind of okay. Like, given that he's played up front, he's played wide. Like, he's played with Giroud, he's played with Abraham. Like, I mean, he's been shifted around constantly. I think he's basically been fine. And I just don't have any worries about Timo Werner at all. I think that he will continue to score at a pretty consistent rate over the rest of the season. And if he takes a step up next year from where he is this year, he'll immediately be one of the best forwards in the league.
Yeah. I mean, the only real worrying sign, I think, was that miss against Fulham, if that makes sense. When you're one-on-one, you've just got to be finishing that. And then obviously he misses a penalty this weekend. That is almost heart-wrenching when you watch that from the sidelines, because you know how much that will have meant to us too. But yeah, I recently wrote about Werner for a Explain video we did. He is playing a slightly different position to what he played for Leipzig. He's being asked to be involved in a lot more link-up play, which isn't really what he likes to do. He's not a very progressive player in terms of his passing, and at the moment he's going backwards quite a lot. And normally Leipzig played in that kind of 4-2-2-2, and he sort of drifted in from the middle to the left. He didn't actually play on the wing as much as people seem to think. It's more of just a space he would occupy and then sort of attack and drive in from there. And I think when he's being exclusively made to play on the wing and link up a lot more, like I said, it's certainly letting his kind of ability down. And his shot creation from dribbles has dramatically fallen, which kind of gives you an indication that it's not always, you can't just buy a player and expect him to replicate that form when you're asked to play a completely different style and system. And maybe he's one of the players that will benefit from a new coach who maybe takes this team in a different direction, because it might facilitate more that the way that he likes to attack and the way that he sort of to get the most out of him, I suppose, because at the moment, I don't think that Lampard's system was really helping him out.
No, I mean, Tuchel will have probably more of a fluid attacking front line, which I think will definitely help. I mean, the good thing about Werner is that he has a history of putting up elite output either as a striker or off the wing. So long as when he's playing off the wing, he's playing as a striker stationed on the wing, rather than like an actual winger. Like that's obviously like a nuance that sometimes we don't give enough attention to. Yeah, I mean, I still struggle to figure out what I think Chelsea's best attacking lineup is, because I'm tempted to think that, like, it has Pulisic and Hudson-Odoi in it, because every time I watch Hudson-Odoi, he's incredible. And he is like an actual kind of natural winger. But I mean, yeah, this is the trouble now. I feel like Chelsea are going to be kind of tied into selling some of these guys. Like, I think they're going to have to try and sell Tammy Abraham at some point, because I don't necessarily think that they're going to be able to play. If Tuchel was being brought in with an eye on getting the best out of Werner and Kai Havertz, I don't see how he'll be able to do that and play Tammy Abraham regularly and get Ziyech in and get Pulisic in. Like, it just doesn't seem possible to me. So I wouldn't be surprised if Mason Mount and Tammy Abraham are kind of quite major casualties of Tuchel coming in, because Havertz is a problem. Like, Havertz has so much talent and he can play in a number of different positions, but he also needs a system kind of built around him to maximize him in a way I don't think you need that with Werner. Like, Werner can do a bunch of different things for you, like play as a striker, play off the last man, like just kind of run in behind. Whereas Kai Havertz, I feel like, needs to be at the center of Chelsea's attack, and I'm a bit concerned about how that's going to work, because his numbers, and certainly just watching him on the pitch, he has really struggled to adapt this season. And you'd expect that, right? He's like 3-4 years younger than Timo Werner. You'd expect that he's going to have maybe slightly more difficulty adapting. But I don't know. What have you made of Havertz settling in Chelsea?
I saw a Chelsea fan this weekend for a walk, and I think the general emphasis it was almost like the club really felt they needed to buy him just because they were the only ones who really could at that moment in time. Whether or not he necessarily had a place at the club, whether or not they necessarily really needed him at that moment in time, is debatable. I feel like they felt they had no choice, but they had to kind of tie up one of the most exciting young players in Europe before someone else maybe got ahead of them. And the result is, as you said, quite a convoluted attack at Chelsea, where it's difficult to really fit these guys in. And yeah, he's certainly the one who suffered. I think Havertz might be, out of all these players we mentioned, the kind of João Felix, and that I do think he will come good. I mean, passes into the final third have decreased from 3.7 to 3. Pressures kind of increased a little bit, and he's having to defend a lot more, and his dribbles are a bit down. So I still feel like the foundations of a good player are there, and we saw that in kind of drips and drabs in recent games where he has looked flashy in moments. Certainly against Leicester, there were some nice kind of touches and swivels, but he just looks like a guy. And this is maybe a criticism of Lampard. There's, a lot of what they were saying was that the press wasn't very well coordinated, and that some of his instructions weren't necessarily reaching the players in the best way. And perhaps he's maybe suffered from a lack of direction and understanding. Because like I said, there's a lot of pressure on his shoulders just to go in there. And when they don't quite know where to play him, he seems to be the kind of guy who's suffering from that. Because if you remember, João Felix was playing very defensively last season. And then it's only recently that he's been able to push forward a lot more. It certainly helped that they've had Luis Suarez arrive in that regard. So I feel like, as I said, the foundations for Havertz to be a solid player are there. It's just going to take a bit of more familiarity within the side, and I guess just a coach to come in and say, you're the man who I want to perform this role and this role alone. And I always remember that, Eden Hazard, apparently managers used to give him a lot of leeway. They used to ask him to follow those instructions, and he would kind of just say, look, let me just do my thing on the pitch. And he always kind of had the upper hand in that regard. And I feel like Havertz just needs to get to that point to excel. But it's just difficult at the moment when you've got so many other players in that side to afford him that kind of responsibility. Because even Ziyech's come in and I think posted a few bit more goal involvements and stuff like that. So yeah, I still feel Havertz will come good. It's just going to take someone to really make sure that he feels like he's the centerpiece of that project, which I don't think he does right now. But yeah, if we maybe move on to certainly your club, Arsenal, and maybe look at their biggest signing of the summer in Thomas Partey. Yeah. He's only played 90 minutes so far this season. How have you taken to Thomas Partey? Obviously, the narrative around Arsenal changes every week. It's kind of like in the dumps one week, superheroes the next. I love the fact that Pepe has almost just been forgotten about as a signing. He's just sort of tucked away somewhere. No one really mentions him. I don't think the same will happen to Thomas Partey. How have you enjoyed his kind of arrival in English football?
Oh, well, just on the Pepe thing, I actually was watching a little bit of the game against Southampton in the FA Cup at the weekend. And about 20 minutes in, I was just trying to think like who is playing like in our front four, and then I was like Willian, Nketiah, Martinelli, and I spent so long trying to think of the fourth guy. I was like, who is it? Who's paying? And I was like, oh, it's our £72 million signing, like playing off the wing. Right. Okay, cool.
That is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, Pepe's been pretty bad, but I also think, maybe he'll be a bit better with Smith Rowe there if he gets a chance, because, Saka's output has gone up a lot with Smith Rowe there, but I don't hold out huge hopes for Pepe, really. But Partey, I think Partey is actually a really interesting one, because I think that whatever your view was of Partey in the summer, unless you thought he was a bad player, you can basically claim that you were right. So in the summer, a load of stats guys kind of got in trouble for saying, like, I don't think this is a good signing for Arsenal. He's like 27. Like, by the time guys like Saka and Martinelli are hitting their physical peak around 23, Partey will probably he'll be 30, 31. He'll need to be replaced. This seems like a short-term signing for a club that actually are embarking on a long-term rebuild. And a load of Arsenal fans were like, what are you talking about? He's amazing. Like, he's going to be amazing for us. And the thing is, when he's been on the pitch, I actually think he's been great. Like, everybody said he was like a good ball winner who also offered, really good dribbling and progressive passing. And that's all true. Like, his defensive actions have gone up from 3.3 a game to 5. Dribbles are at 2 a game, which is outstanding. Yeah. Pressure's pretty decent. And his progressive passing has gone up. And when you watch him in the game, like, he so often plays an unexpected pass. You look and you think, okay, well, he'll go out to the wing here. And then he plays one round the corner, into somebody between the lines. And that's really, really great. But the issue with signing a guy who's like 27 on a 4 or 5 year deal is that you expect to get all your value in the first kind of 2 or 3 years. You expect that the first 2 or 3 years they'll be like peak. And then the couple of years after that, they'll maybe start to slide as their physicality declines. And the problem is he's missed half of his first season with injuries. Like, this should be one of his most valuable seasons as an Arsenal player, and he's already missed half of it. So already you're kind of losing some of your value on the Partey deal there. But the other side of it is that in the games that he's played in the Premier League, and this is a little bit harsh because he got like 21 minutes against Palace. I think he got 7 minutes against City. He's been in and out. Arsenal have won 2, drawn 1, and lost 4. And I think that's despite Partey being pretty universally impressive in those games. So this is the other issue, which is that Arsenal at the end of last season looked like they were starting to shore up the defence a bit, but looked like they were really struggling to create chances. And the point with Partey was, it was like, he's not going to improve that. A load of fans were like, well, he'll pass the ball forward more, and that'll mean that we have more space in the final third and our attack will improve. But it didn't. The only thing that's improved our attack a little bit has been an easy run of fixtures coinciding with a shift to the 4-2-3-1 and Smith Rowe coming in. And my concern there is that Arsenal have spent £45 million on a player, and he's a great player. They were absolutely right that he's a great player. And yet the team isn't actually that much better than they are without him. Like, I think he improves the side, but I don't think that he was as significant a need for this squad as getting in a proper number 10 was. My other worry is that the midfield is getting old. Like, Torreira might come back from his loan and we'd probably look to sell him. Guendouzi comes back next summer. We'll have 1 year left on his deal. And unless he and Arteta really patch up their relationship, he'll probably go too. That leaves Arsenal's midfield options as Partey, who's 27, El Neni, who's 28, Xhaka, who's 28, and Willock, who's just like not good enough, even though he's 21. So suddenly you've actually got quite an old midfield. I think that a lot of people kind of say, oh, well, Partey's a good player. Have Arsenal got a good player for their money? Yes, they absolutely have. He's great. I'm delighted that he's great. But does he solve Arsenal's biggest issue? No. Is it sensible squad building for the future? Probably not. And would they have been better off spending that money elsewhere? I think probably yes. Now, in some ways, they've got a little bit lucky here. Smith Rowe's come in and he looks like he's clearly Premier League level. I don't know what level he'll end up being, but he looks good. And it looks like they're going to bring in Odegaard on loan this month. He's not going to have an option to buy, but apparently Arsenal can discuss this with Real Madrid in the summer if the loan goes well. Now, if they end up with Smith Rowe and Odegaard as their number 10s and Partey in the midfield, then suddenly you say, okay, well, actually, this is starting to look pretty decent. But I think that basically people were right that he was a very good player, and people were right that he was probably not the correct signing for Arsenal. So yeah, I feel like I'm excited to watch him. I like watching him. I think he's a great player. I also think that Arsenal are quite a stupid club and are continuing to make stupid decisions. And I think that this was probably not a very clever decision to me.
Yeah, I was surprised as any that out of Aouar and Partey, that it was Partey they went for in the end. And I know you don't believe that Aouar is this kind of like creative player that he's sometimes held up to be, and you're right, he isn't. But I actually think Partey's done a good job at trying to be creative. I was looking at kind of the issues when Arsenal were basically just pumping it into the wings and then just trying to sort of cross it in and having absolutely dismal luck during that period of the season. He was probably the one. A lot of the times he would look up and there wasn't really an option for him. I think he was probably the most frustrated member of that midfield because he was whereas Xhaka was probably just knocking it into the wings and thinking my progressive distance is really looking good right now. I think Partey was actually looking to make a more like incisive pass. That's genuinely how I feel about it. I've been looking at a lot of these kind of stats. But yeah, I feel as if now they have someone like Smith Rowe, someone who can sit in that hole and provide that link up. I think we are probably going to see the best of Partey because he is excellent when he does drive forwards and can arrive in the final third in a bit more of an explosive manner. So I think certainly out of a lot of the players that we're going to discuss, I think he's had a standard first 6 months, which doesn't leave me worrying too much about what to expect from the future. But I am still surprised that they ultimately went for him in the end. Even though Atletico they kind of look like they've progressed on without him, which is maybe a worrying sign there. Just interestingly, Guendouzi, I've read that he's apparently fallen out with teammates at Hertha Berlin. I think the Berlin manager's just been sacked. So yeah, Guendouzi looks like he's coming back with his sort of tails between his legs once more. So I'm not sure if you'd want to welcome him back. But if we look at
pity, I think Guendouzi's a really good player. Like he is just like a knob. Like I mean, that seems to be the problem. Like he's just going to be one of those guys who's like a bit of a knob. Like I mean, I guess the interesting thing with Partey is that like the signature performance of Partey's time at Arsenal so far was that win away at Old Trafford, right? And in that game, Arsenal created literally nothing. Like, now, Man United didn't create anything either, but that was a game that basically would have been 0-0 if they hadn't given us a penalty for absolutely no reason whatsoever. And so I look at that and I think if we hadn't had that penalty, that game would have been a 0-0 draw. Like, and would everyone be talking about it as like such an incredible Arsenal performance? Like to me, that was exactly the issue, that I was like, okay, Partey makes us better at playing this particular defensive style that creates next to nothing. But to me, what will decide how good Arsenal are by the end of the season is how well they do in this 4-2-3-1, not whether they're playing Partey instead of Ceballos. Like, Partey is better. He's our best midfielder, but he can't win games on his own. He's just not that sort of player. And that's not his fault, but it's a fault of the club that they decided they needed a DM more than anything else. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if we go out in the summer, Saliba comes back from his loan, but Arsenal still target a right-sided centre-back, you know, and like don't do anything in the midfield. Like if they move on Guendouzi and Torreira, but they just have like 3 old guys in the midfield. And like I just don't understand what this club is doing with squad building. The only hope we have at the moment, I think, is that Willian has gone so badly that Arsenal realised that they should never sign players over 30 ever again. Because it's been such a catastrophe. But I don't know. The thing I have with Partey is I kind of think, why didn't Man United sign Partey?
Yeah.
Like, he would have been perfect for them. Can you imagine that midfield now with Partey in it instead of having signed Van der Beek? And I like Van der Beek, but Partey's clearly a much better fit for that midfield.
Yeah, I mean, if you ask anyone at Manchester United, the one thing they'd say they're like crying out for is that defensive midfielder. I mean, I love McTominay. Yeah. I think Scott McTominay is great. But Fred as well. Fred's had that kind of rejuvenation. But at the end of the day, they can be upgraded. if the
Yeah,
money's
definitely.
if the certain personnel are available. And you look at Van de Beek, he's a bit of a midfield runner who creates chances and gets shots, like a sort of Dutch Aaron Ramsey. Whether or not he'd be happy with us saying that, I'm not sure. But it's hard to see how United expected him to fit into that midfield with Pogba and Fernandes as well. Bear in mind, Pogba's kind of struggled to find the perfect position for him next to Fernandes, certainly. And now Pogba's playing amazing again and everyone's lauding Pogba once more. It looks like Van de Beek's not... his opportunities are going to be decreased even more. He's only played 253 league minutes and started 2 Premier League games this season. That is really not what was expected. I think there's already kind of murmurs out of the Dutchman's camp and certainly members of the Dutch national side saying maybe this wasn't the right decision after all. But he's gone from 2 shots and 1.9 key passes to 1.1 combined. So that shows you how kind of best attributes of his game are being dampened a little bit at United. And then his defensive actions have gone up, though, from 3 to 4.3, which really shows you maybe he's trying to react in order to fulfill, I suppose, the gap that was in that United squad. But it's hard to see where he really comes in unless Pogba does actually leave in the summer for good. United aren't silly. They're not going to overly expose themselves in games at the moment. So, I mean, where do you think he has a genuine long-term future in United's midfield? Because they are one of the teams that, if a signing doesn't go well and if it isn't the right fit, they're not afraid to kind of shift it on. We've seen that with Di Maria, we've seen that with Alexis Sanchez and stuff like that. Do you think this is like a more of a long-term investment and kind of the foundations of a good player are there? It's just not the right side at the moment for him to fit in.
I definitely think that he's a good player. Like, I definitely think they can get value out of him. But I think to get value out of him, they're going to have to settle on a different formation. Like, I just don't see how you can have... Like, I don't really know how you can get the best out of him without significantly upgrading your defensive midfielder or changing your formation around completely. Like, I think if they had a diamond, if they play with a diamond, then you could play Bruno in the hole behind, Rashford and Martial, or Rashford and Cavani, or Rashford and Greenwood, or whatever, but Rashford should always play. And then you can have, and then what you normally have, right, is that defensive midfielder at the bottom, and you have 2 guys on either side who shuttle. Like, when the team's attacking, they attack. When the team's defending, they defend. And I think Van de Beek would actually be really good at one of those roles. I think he's quite a versatile player. I think he's a hard-working player. He's not really an on-the-ball player. When he plays in the 10 role, like Ramsey, he's making runs off the ball. Like, he's not so much like, getting on it and passing constantly like Bruno is. He's a guy who's making late runs into the box to try and score goals. So I think he could potentially be a midfield shuttler there, but in order to do that, you need a much better number 6. Yeah. Like, you need a number 6 who can pass. So you need a Partey type, or you need a Rodrigo Bentancur type. You could maybe go for an Ndidi, though I'm not sure. I'm still not sure how good a passer he is, or a Declan Rice, which of course has been kind of rumored as well. That'd be interesting.
Yes,
but yeah, I think that without a formation change, it's really, really hard to see how Bruno and Van de Beek coexist, unless you do something really wacky, like play Van de Beek or Bruno off the right wing, like Wenger did with Aaron Ramsey at one point, where he was like playing off the right. He obviously wasn't actually playing as a winger. But one of the reasons Wenger was able to do that is because he had Bellerin playing as the right back then, and United's right back is obviously extremely defensive. In Aaron Wan-Bissaka, so it's again hard to know how that would work. So I think it's a significant problem to be solved, but I don't really know why they did it. They could have just sat on that money, or they could have gone and bought somebody who actually played in a position of need for them. And instead they kind of were like, well, this is a good player, we may as well get him, better to get him than nobody. And I don't quite understand that rationale.
Yeah, I guess his other problem at the moment is there's no kind of fan agenda for him to be in that starting 11, is there? With Man United performing so well, a lot of the time with these signings, kind of the pressure comes with the media, kind of bubbles up in that way, and before you know it, they get given a run out. At the moment, I can't see Ole Gunnar Solskjaer wanting to mess around with that midfield a lot to accommodate Van de Beek. Like we said, he hasn't played that much football at all, sort of 2.5 games in sort of Premier League minutes terms. So it looks like it's going to be difficult for him to get in. One player who maybe we expected more of, and I chucked this name in because of kind of the stuff I've been seeing on Twitter, Thiago Alcantara. We saw that kind of TalkSport pundit ranting on about how he was a completely useless fit for Liverpool, which was a really kind of surprising thing to see. So I thought we'd have a look. Is there any kind of proof in the negativity surrounding him? 0 wins for Liverpool when he starts, which I think is giving him like a 25% win rate, and he's got 0 goal contributions. He has only played 400 minutes in the league this year. He kind of arrived injured. I think he had a niggle, and it's kind of struggled to get in to the team from there. But Liverpool are stacked for midfielders now. The Ox is coming back. It's going to be interesting to see what happens to him in the next 6 months. But I was writing about Bayern Munich recently, and a lot of the problems, I suppose it's hard to say Bayern Munich have problems when they're 7 points clear, but a lot of the problems is that Thiago was their best player when it came to relieving pressure in front of that defence. I don't think Kimmich can match him for passes under pressure. And I think he was consistently dribbling past 3 players per game as a way of kind of alleviating the on-rush, the press which they were facing. And that was better than Mane, Salah, De Bruyne, better than a lot of these guys across Europe. And also he was doing 4 defensive actions per game, which was only matched by Alphonso Davies within that Bayern Munich squad. And although his goal contribution wasn't great, I think his expected goal chain was about 0.89, which means that almost 1 goal a game, he's expected to certainly be involved in the build-up, the passing progress towards that goal. So you get an indication of just how important he was to that Bayern squad, and maybe why they're kind of taking on more shots on goal and stuff like that, although I do think a lot of that is down to tiredness. At Liverpool, there is an argument to say he has been a little bit ineffective, and that he was accused of ducking against this Fernandes free kick at the weekend, which isn't going to help his cause at all. And when you look at that Liverpool midfield, what is your opinion on what he can contribute, and whether or not you think it's just a case of he's just struggling to kind of come up to speed maybe within a new team? Do you think there's any real issue there, or do you think it's just a bit of silly noise coming in the press about Thiago?
I think it's silly. I think it's mostly like this with or without you stuff, which people really love, but which is almost always bollocks. There's this thing that people like to do, and it really comes out of basketball, where people love to look at a team's performance with a player and without a player and think that that's somehow important, and it generally really isn't. In basketball, it makes sense because there are so few players on the pitch that they make a huge difference individually. In football, it's rarely the case, and I think that what's largely happened this season with Liverpool's midfield is that it's been completely rejigged to make up for losses. The fact that their defense has been so hit by injuries has meant that they've had to destabilize the midfield by moving guys like Fabinho and Henderson back into defense. Well, that's meant that Thiago has come into a midfield that's kind of rejigging itself. So you've got, when you've got a midfield like Thiago and the Ox and Curtis Jones, that's a lot of pressure on Thiago, especially defensively. But he's actually been asked to play much more of a final third role this season. Looking at his numbers, his chances created have gone from 1 to 2. Though passes into the final third, which have always been obscene. I think he leads Europe at the moment. He's on 12 a game. Wow. But he's passing into the box a lot more. And I don't know. But his defensive action is still very high. His dribbles are still very high. I mean, when I watch him as well, I see a guy who quite often is isolated, trying to do everything in the midfield. And I think that's because while Curtis Jones is a great passer, he's not a great anything else yet. The Ox is difficult to work out right now. And so to me, I feel all of Liverpool's problems, the same way that people have been saying, oh, their forwards are short on confidence or whatever, I kind of just feel like Liverpool have not had the rub of the green in most of their games recently. Most of their games have been tight, where Liverpool have basically edged it by the underlying numbers, and a lot of those games have turned into losses or draws. And it just seems like they're just trying to make up for the fact that they've had some really significant squad issues, and I don't really attribute that to Thiago. I think losing Van Dijk is a big problem, and Fabinho goes into defence, and yes, he looks like a very good centre-back, but suddenly the midfield needs to be significantly put back together. And so, yeah, I don't know. I certainly don't think Thiago is a problem. I think actually in the long run, what he is a problem solver. He can play for them as a 6, he can play as an 8, he can play as a 10. And a broader issue right now is that the players around him are not quite dovetailing the way that you'd want them to. But I really have no major concerns about Liverpool or about Thiago either. And I think, again, this is just people love to go on about a big signing failing. and people love to like try and dig into things that don't need to be dug into. So like when you see, okay, an example of this is like when you see a young player scoring loads of their shots, then you will always see loads of stories come out about why they're scoring all their shots. So like when Mason Greenwood last year was way out over his skis in expected goals, like everything he hit was going in. There were all these stories where people were like, well, the reason he's overperforming is because he's just so incredibly talented, with both feet. He hits the ball so hard. So he is always going to overperform his expected goals. That's just going to happen. And then this season, he isn't overperforming at all. He just came back to earth. And similarly, like with a team like Liverpool, and a player like Thiago, when like their results seem like they're underperforming, and you look at the stats and you're like, well, actually, they're just getting a little bit unlucky at the moment, and it'll probably come back round. There are always these stories that come out at the same time instead, where people are like, no, like here are all the reasons. Like there's this issue in the dressing room, or there's this, particular combination of players that just doesn't work, and people like really, really dig into these issues. And actually, normally what's happening is just like luck goes up and down, and like generally things level out. So I expect that things will level out.
It's interesting. I was writing about Adama Traore last Friday, and he obviously had that amazing season last year. I think he's on 0 goal contributions in the league so far at the moment. And then everyone's going, oh, shocking, he's fallen off. I think you have to remember, this last year was the first season that he really put together like some incredible numbers. Certainly helped by Raul Jimenez. And then everyone's going, oh, what on earth has happened to him? And I'm not saying this is what I think, but there is an argument which is like, maybe he just had one really good season. Do you know what I mean? Maybe he had 1 year where every cross found its mark, every shot, which he's got, his accuracy is abysmal. I think he scores with 25% of every shot he gets on target, and he hardly gets a shot on target. So maybe he just really went over the top and overperformed, and you're expecting a lot of him if you think that he was ever going to be at that level again. And it's not as if, he played with Raul Jimenez all the way up to kind of the end of November. So there was opportunities for him to score. So yeah, it is an interesting point what you make about Mason Greenwood and like what we should really be expecting from these footballers. But I agree with you, Thiago. I guess Thiago suffers from the same kind of argument you made about Partey, in that people are expecting him straight away to be that guy in the midfield. But that Liverpool midfield has been so, if you imagine like that Liverpool machine, which was so successful, was fairly consistent with its lineups week in, week out, wasn't it? It didn't really shift much. You could pretty much name Liverpool starting 11 without even thinking about it every week. But now, with everything that's gone on, the hectic schedule, it's kind of been messed around a little bit. But I agree. Once normality kind of resumes and they get a lot of their best players back in the same positions, I think we'll suddenly start to see Thiago blossom, because he'll start to play with the Liverpool team I think he probably envisioned he was joining, as opposed to the one that he's kind of the hodgepodge situation that he's got into at the moment. But yeah, not many concerns there. But if we maybe leave England for a final section and have a look at some of the big European transfers from last summer. Really interesting one to hit off. The Arthur-Pjanic swap deal, the mysterious multi-million pound deal, which maybe had a bit more to do with kind of dodgy financing than necessarily need of the players. But yeah, Arthur, second biggest signing of the summer. He's only played 660 minutes in Serie A. That actually puts him on track to get more minutes this year than he did last season. Interestingly, 1,100 minutes for Barcelona. They paid about £70 million for him. But 1 goal and 0 assists so far. Passes into the final thirds have decreased from 7.7 to 5. Progressive passes, 4.1 to 5.4. His pressures have actually gone up, and defensive actions increased. He was never that prolific a scorer anyway at Barcelona. He sort of hinted at it, but was never really given a massive opportunity there. And it's really interesting with Juventus, because they've obviously got so many midfielders to play around with. Bentancur, as you said, he's been excellent this season. Rabiot's a lot more versatile. Ramsey has kind of been given opportunities, and he is better in the final thirds. But is this another case, in your opinion, that did Juventus need Arthur? Was he really the player that they needed? And I mean, and is he kind of maybe being unfairly hit by the price tag that he came with?
I mean, I don't have too much of an issue with them signing Arthur, given that they got Pjanic off the books in return. Like, I think that's okay. Like, you got rid of like a 29-year-old. and you've brought in what, a 24-year-old, 23, 24-year-old. Like, I think that's good business, even if you end up not liking the player, because, you know, Barcelona aren't going to be able to shift Pjanic, whereas Juventus will be able to shift Arthur if they want. Like, somebody else you could imagine having a use for him. I mean, what I don't get with Arthur and what I've never understood is what he is. Like, in Brazil, he was really highly rated, and people are like, oh, he's a good defender, like, he's a really good passer, he's pretty press resistant. But now I'm like, what is this guy? Like, what is he? He's not a 6 because he doesn't do enough defensive work. He's not an 8 because he's not really mobile enough, and he doesn't do enough defensive work. And he's not a 10 because he's not creative enough.
Yeah,
like, and he's not really a goal threat. Like, whenever he scores goals, people always be like, oh, look at this amazing goal from Arthur, and it'll be like a goal from 35 yards. And I think, yeah, that's great, but your number 10 should probably be more of a consistent goal threat, like in the box, than just banging one in from like 30 yards. So I really don't know what Arthur is, but on the other hand, I don't really know what Pirlo's Juventus are. So, I mean, it's entirely possible that there's some sort of rejig which ends up finding a home for him. But I think he's one of those problem players who, unless he settles on the perfect role at the perfect club under the right coach, he might just always slightly underwhelm. And when you look at Juventus, you know, they've got those guys who just have obvious skill sets. Like, you could whack Rabiot, Ramsey and Bentancur in a 3-man midfield and it would make sense instantly. You know, they all do enough defensive work for that. They're all good enough passes for that. Ramsey is obviously the guy who goes in the final third. Rabiot is the guy who connects the final third to the middle third, and Bentancur is the guy who protects the defense. And it makes perfect sense. And if Arthur came in, you'd be like, which one of these roles does he do? And certainly he doesn't do any of those roles, I think, better than those 3 guys. So getting Pjanic off the books, great. I don't really understand. I mean, Barcelona are just a disaster. I really don't. I don't even know what Barcelona can do to fix themselves at this point. I think that, like, financial oblivion is coming for them. Like, I just don't know. I literally don't know, like, what happens. Like, what do they have to sell the stadium or something? Like, they're in so much trouble.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, like, I feel like everyone's kind of a loser with this deal, but Juventus, if they want, could probably sell Arthur.
Yeah.
To, I don't know. You can imagine like Pep or someone weird being like, yeah, Arthur's just the guy for me. Or even like Arteta doing something stupid and being like, yeah, Arthur, like he passes a lot and does nothing else. That's the sort of player we should have. But I don't really get him. Yeah. I don't really get what he's for.
Yeah, you're right. Pjanic is not exactly lit up the Camp Nou. 0 goal involvements, 390 minutes. And it looks like surely if Wijnaldum does go there in the summer, then I can't see it getting much better for him. But another 30-year-old, as you said.
Yeah, just old guys on big wages. And it's like, yeah, I mean, like, is Wijnaldum good? Like, sure. Yeah, I don't know. Wijnaldum, like, I'm on record as not being a huge fan of Wijnaldum, but, like, Barcelona just need guys to fix them. And I have no idea where they're going to get them. Like, I think, actually, as much as they have no money, like, a more sensible thing than, like, signing a guy like Wijnaldum at 30 on like big wages would be just to sign some people who are like 21 for like 10 million a pop. Like, it wouldn't be that bad for them. Like, it can't work out too badly, but yeah. I'm seriously concerned about what they're going to do there.
I think Ricky Puig had a goal involvement this weekend, which is a real positive for him because he's
a good player. Yeah,
hardly really been given a look in under Koeman certainly this season. I thought we'd just finish on a like more positive note with Victor Osimhen, because obviously, for Napoli, that's a huge signing, isn't it? The money they paid for him, I think in the 60 million ballpark, and his initial stats: 2 goals, 1 assist, 490 minutes of football. Doesn't scream a great success. He has been injured, but I think certainly out of all of these, he is certainly one of the people I reckon will come on incredibly strong. I think he's posted something like 3.9 shots per game when he has plays. I think there's definitely a place with him within Gattuso's team. They've really sort of burned hot and cold. And certainly Dries Mertens getting no younger, is he? Let's face it. So I feel Osimhen does have a bright future coming up for him. And it's just, he's once again guilty of having this giant price tag on his head. I mean, Lille, they must be licking their lips at the fact they sold him and Pepe for something like 130 million combined. And sort of what they've gone on to achieve. I wonder, like, in the long run, how clubs are going to approach Lille star products and say you can't necessarily command this kind of money if they're not necessarily going to reproduce. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's just something I've been thinking about. But yeah, Osimhen, McCubbin loves him on Eurofootball Daily. I think he's a really exciting player, and I think Napoli did incredibly well to convince him to go there to the Pass on the Pay, and he's got the kind of potential to become a big player in that part of the world, because they really do get behind a star player if he starts to perform.
Yeah, I think the only guy... I mean, the thing about Lille is, like, the only guy who I think... Maybe I'm forgetting someone here. But Pepe is really the only person, I think, who's come out of there and has significantly underperformed after moving on. Like, I think Osimhen is going to be really, really good as well. Like, he's an intelligent player. Like, he's a pretty physical specimen. Like, he's fast, good shot numbers. But earlier in the season had really high key pass numbers. At one stage, I think he was producing about 3 chances a game, which shows... I think a real level of like game intelligence. He's the guy in there where you think, okay, Mertens is going to decline, Insigne is going to decline, Lozano I think will probably never be like an all-star.
Yeah.
But Osimhen's the guy who you think, okay, here's the one who explodes. Here's the one who keeps you competitive. And their attack is one of the best in Europe right now, despite the fact that he had a shoulder injury, right? And then he had coronavirus. I think he's out with coronavirus at the moment. Well, that's quite exciting for them. And I think that they're probably one of the favourites to certainly make the top 4 by the end of the season. And then next year, if he takes a step forward in his development, that could be really, really... And if they can keep hold of Fabian Ruiz, that could be really, really exciting for them. Because, yeah, I think he's one of the best, most well-rounded young forwards in the world. On the other hand... Lille sold him for a huge sum of money and have brought in Jonathan David, who looks like he's going to be a really good player for them as well. So yeah, I mean, it's one of those deals that kind of works out for everybody. I don't know. I mean, the problem with Osimhen is that he is pretty much tied to Napoli as long as they want him. Like, because when you go somewhere for 60 mil, the amount that a bigger club is going to have to pay to get you is like ridiculous. Like now for somebody to... It was like when Richarlison went to Everton for like 40 mil. It meant that if any club wanted to sign Richarlison later, they were going to have to pay like 80. And similarly now, you'd imagine that for Osimhen to get out of Napoli, he'll either have to run down his contract or prove to a bigger side that he's a £100 million player, because that's the kind of money Napoli will want. And the question is whether he'll be able to do that, because that's like a level... a level up from even where he is right now.
Yeah, I think really it's just a case he's been unlucky of injuries so far. I think he got a red card in the Europa League recently. So I completely agree with you. It's a gamble from Napoli's perspective, but if it pays off, there could be some serious benefits to that in the long run. But yeah, I think we've pretty much covered every player we set out to explore. I think what would you say on the whole was the best and worst big signing of the summer, in your opinion?
That's a good question. Let me pull up a list of the top ones, because I've got them here somewhere, and we can have a look at them. Okay. Right. Well, there were only 11 that cost over 40 mil. Ruben Dias is on there. Ruben Dias was a very good signing. Ben Chilwell, very good signing. Jota, very good signing. I'd say the best signing of the summer was Achraf Hakimi.
Okay.
I felt that way at the time. I still feel that way. Like, I think that is a transformative player. Like, for Inter, I think he's the sort of player that Inter should have had no right to get, really, and could have played for any team in the world. So I'll say him, because 36 million for a 22-year-old elite attacking right back who comes in there as a right wing back. Like, he's perfect. He's totally perfect for that club, and his contributions so far this season have been absolutely obscene. The worst, I'd probably say, I have issues with obviously a lot of the ones we've talked about, but Partey at least is a really good player. He has that to recommend him. Havertz, I think, will be great, so he has that to recommend him. And Arthur even is offset by Pjanic, but it's either Arthur or Nathan Ake.
Oh yeah, no, Nathan Ake. I was just looking at his name there, Nathan Ake. I mean, I don't think that's his fault. I just don't know what they were really expecting of him. It wasn't.
Yeah, agreed.
Bournemouth were just like, well, look, if you want him, pay this much money. And I think City were in that kind of problem moment where they were really searching around for a bit more defensive reinforcements and thought, yeah. So I don't know. It's hard to blame him for that regard. I feel like Nelson Semedo's move to Wolves, I really don't like him as a player. I think he's really poor. I can't believe. I mean, we've been a bit mean about Barcelona, but that is one of the things they did do right to get that much money out of him. I'd really like to praise Wesley Fofana to Leicester City. I think that is such a good, clever signing. And I was trying to think of the last defensive signing, certainly, that they got wrong. Because I feel like Soyuncu's been excellent. Johnny Evans was a brilliant addition. And now Fofana as well. So I feel as if a lot of respect to Leicester for their transfer policy, certainly in defence. And even selling Chilwell, which, like you said, was great. And Timothy Castagne's come in there and he's looked like a really competent player. And I think some of the younger guys they've promoted. So that is, for me, just really how to do good business. But I agree, the Pjanic-Arthur swap deal, simply based on the numbers alone, is a really disappointing return.
Yeah, I also think you probably have to give a little bit of a shout out to Aaron Ramsdale going off to Sheffield United. I think Sheffield United took some big swings this summer on young players, and those young players may come good, but it's probably going to contribute to their relegation. Like Ryan Brewster, I don't know how we say his name, but he may well be good. But he has not settled at all. They've got basically nothing out of him for 20 mil this season, and that is probably going to be a contributing factor in them losing their place in the league.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Chris Wilder was saying they've got nothing to spend this January, really.
Ooh,
it's like, well, I mean, it's your own fault. You went and, Ramsdale's numbers weren't. I hate being kind of negative in this regard, but his numbers were not great last year for Bournemouth. Do you know what I mean? They weren't exceptional, and I don't think it's his fault that they've gone from, because they've other issues running throughout the team. I think Jack O'Connell's been injured for the whole season. And things like that. So he's not playing behind the defence that he maybe thought he was going to be playing behind. But yeah, really poor decision, really poor transfers. And then there's like Oliver Burke as well. I mean, anyway, less said about the better.
Bit of a depressing one for Sheffield United fans, I think. But I mean, I think that there have been some really interesting moves, and like I'm glad that people are doing some kind of more left field stuff. I think it's been kind of fun. So I guess people will be annoyed about the players we talked about or didn't talk about, and maybe we can do another update of this towards the end of the season and see how some of the January ones have gone as well, because I was looking this morning and I didn't realise Mateta had gone through. Like there are some interesting moves out there that are happening, and I quite like Seb Haller to Ajax as well. What have you been up to at the moment, Henry? Is there anything that you'd like to plug on any of our channels before we say goodbye?
Yes. We've got a really interesting look at kind of La Liga, I guess the decline against the Premier League, and looking at maybe how the Premier League has become that kind of number one league in Europe's top 5 leagues. I think, once again, there's a great La Masia script. I think you did the voiceover for that on sort of top 10 players to leave La Masia. That's done really well. And I recently did something on Aston Villa and kind of looking at their crazy 5 years, because a really interesting story to do with how, when they lost to Fulham in the Championship playoff, how it almost went completely wrong for them there. So that's really interesting stuff. But I was thinking, Pat, next time we do this, we were talking earlier in the editorial, I was pitching a Wayne Rooney script, and I said, when we look back at the old Football Daily videos, we found Football Daily Draws, which was a history of Wayne Rooney's time at United through a Shrek animation, which was like, I couldn't believe that that was the kind of stuff Football Daily. So I was wondering, maybe like next time, I'd love to hear maybe some of the early days, I'm sure the viewers would too, the early days of Football Daily, and kind of maybe how it's changed from your perspective as the newest member of Football Daily. But yeah, because that kind of content, I can't even imagine us even going near it these days.
Yeah, it was an interesting time. Chris Hamill actually suggested this recently as well, that now that Joe and I have been on FD for 5 years, like we could talk about where we were back then and where we've come since. But I think that'd be an interesting and hopefully optimistic ride through the last few years anyway. Well, thanks very much for joining me today, Henry, and thank you to you guys for listening or watching at home. Make sure that you subscribe to our channel, Football Daily Podcast, on YouTube, or you subscribe to the podcast using whichever podcast app you favour. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next time. Bye.